may have to redo like a second part. Are you around? Are you off tomorrow?
I am, but I don't know what all I got going on because we're getting ready. We may leave tomorrow.
We did 162 minutes. I don't know if Anchor does this long. Like as far as I'll find out. It's gonna probably take like a half hour. I'll just text you tomorrow. We might have to start from. We might have to do the second half again. I hope we're fine.
Okay. But
we're at 162 minutes.
Right.
I mean, it's 1:00. We started it. Right. But that was a huge case, dude.
It is.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, we should hang up and try to get it recorded.
All right. Yep.
See you. All right, bye. Later. Welcome to the podcast that explores mysterious disappearances, bizarre worldly occurrences, strange phenomenon, and basically everything that's weird. When people ask you, what do you do for a living? Do you want to be able to tell them, I'm a producer? Well, now you can. Go to patreon.com, search everything that's weird, and sign up. We'll list you in all of the show notes and mention you in every episode. Go to patreon.com to get started today. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I got a little bit of a cold too, so my kids are petri dishes. All right, welcome to the podcast. Tonight, we have a good one. This is one of my favorites. I'm your host, Anthony. I'm here with Brandon, and we are talking about another story that I love, Dan Cooper, or as the press says, DB Cooper.
Old douchebag. That's all I think of when I hear DB.
Well, he never called himself DB Cooper. The press called him DB Cooper, and that's a whole separate thing, but
yeah.
He went by Dan Cooper. So, apparently, in the Washington area, there's a ton of guys that look like DB Cooper. Because when I started getting into this, I remembered there were a bunch of suspects, and you had said there's 800 that the FBI looked at.
Yeah, over the years they said 800 people were suspected at some point.
So we're not going to bore you and go through all 800 people. We'll kind of just hit the all-star team.
You sure? I was all boned up on all 800 of them.
Well, even on the all-star team, there's like 5 guys that could be DB Cooper just by the picture alone.
Right.
The first guy I saw, I'm like, oh, well, that's him.
Yeah.
And then the second guy, I'm like, well, that could be him too.
Then you realize that all guys in 1970 look the same.
It's true though, huh?
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll just get right into it. A man calling himself Dan Cooper gets on a plane heading from Portland to Seattle. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
727.
It's a 727. That'll come into play in just a minute because that specific aircraft is part of the hijacking.
Yes.
Right. This is it's not an open investigation, but they are still looking into credible leads. But officially, the FBI has closed this, and mainly because it happened so long ago.
Right.
But on Thanksgiving Eve, so right away, nobody calls it Thanksgiving Eve. They call it the biggest bar day of the year, don't they?
Right. Right.
A middle-aged man, about 40, boards Northwest Orient Airlines at the Portland International Airport, calling himself Dan Cooper. He buys a cash ticket for $20.
Mm-hmm. Still seems, I don't know. I mean, was that like a half-hour flight?
Right. Well, sometimes Orbitz has those $40 flights. So, like, is Orbitz recession-proof, I guess?
Or maybe. Plug.
Right? Yeah, exactly. He gets on. He orders a drink very calmly. A bourbon and soda.
Good drink.
Good drink. He hands a note to a flight attendant. Her name is Florence Schaefer. And she's kind of dismissive and just puts it in her pocket, thinking that he's just a businessman trying to get a date.
It's that time, man.
She must have been killing it. She must have been hot, right?
Yeah, maybe. She was 23.
Yeah, well, she just thought nothing of it and threw it in her purse. And he's like, hey, you should look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you're cute, but I'm not trying to pick you up. So she looks at it, and here it says, I have a bomb. And he's hijacking the plane. She looks, and he has a briefcase that looks like a cartoon bomb, right?
Right. The old-timey bomb. The bomb they still use on the warning signs, like this is a bomb-free zone deal. They put the little red line through it.
Yeah, it's got an alarm clock.
Yeah.
Like, don't bring that on the plane.
Yeah.
Nick Swartzen does a thing about what you can't bring on a plane.
Yeah.
And like fireworks is one of them. And
right.
He's like, could you imagine being up there and somebody lights off a Roman candle? It's like, pew, pew.
They don't let you bring anything on there anymore.
So the captain is a guy named William Scott. He contacts Seattle Tacoma Airport air traffic control to let them know what's going on. And they tell the passengers.
Yeah, well, the note said, I have a bomb in my briefcase and I want you to sit next to me. So she sat down, I thought, right next to him at some,
She does. But he, by all accounts, he's like a nice guy. He's not harsh with her or anything, but he does get the instructions to the cockpit. So does the other flight attendant give the instructions to the cockpit?
I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of lost in a bunch of the stories.
It is, because it does say to sit down next to me, and that's why I kind of brought it up, because I was kind of wondering if there was something too, because they knew and none of the passengers did, and I just didn't. I was like, if she had to sit down next to him,
that would look weird, right?
Right.
I would think something was up.
Right.
However,
well, I mean, I don't know. In the 70s, would it be like unheard of that a flight attendant was sitting down and flirting with a businessman? I don't know. I
mean, at that time, you could send your kid to the store to get vodka for you.
He was smoking on the plane. That should tell you something.
Right.
They said he's just chain smoking.
He was on that plane you were on with the ashtrays.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was a little kid, I was on.
I've been on planes with ashtrays.
Yeah.
So the pilots, they get the ransom note. They know that he has a bomb. It says what he wants. He wants a truck to refuel the plane, and he wants $200,000. Right?
Yep, and 4 parachutes.
4 parachutes. And he's not. We keep saying he seems rather nice, because at the time they call it air piracy. Mm-hmm. Most of the people are politically driven, and it's a very hostile takeover.
Yeah.
And they usually want to go to a country without extradition, like Cuba or somewhere where they have a safe place to go. They end up around 6 o'clock, a little before 6 o'clock, they land at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, and all the passengers deplane except for the flight attendant, the pilots, and him. They refuel the plane. There's a little bit of delay in the refuel because of, it said something about the airlock with the fuel, and they had to get another truck.
Right.
But it's not a big deal. And they get refueled. Everybody's let off the plane except the flight attendant, him, and the pilots. And he gets his 4 parachutes.
Mm-hmm.
The money's brought on the plane, or Northwest Orient operations manager. He's a guy named Al Lee. And he didn't want him to think he was a cop, so he kind of comes up in plain clothes, gives him the money. He is asked by the FBI if they can do negotiations on the plane. He says no. He lets one of the flight attendants leave, and all the passengers leave. So there's 4 people left on the plane. Now, this is super smart because at this point, when you ask for 4 parachutes, if you ask for 1 parachute, right?
Yeah.
They're going to pack it full of a bed sheet, right?
Right.
You're going to jump out and you're going to pull your ripcord, and a fitted Martha Stewart sheet's going to pop out of your backpack, right?
Right.
Like, you ask for 4 and they're like, oh shoot, he's got like a plan.
Yeah.
And they still aren't real worried about it because they're like, well, we know he's on that plane.
Right. He's not going anywhere.
He's not going anywhere. So he tells them to set course for Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
And they're fueled up. And he also gives them instructions on altitude and airspeed. And this is really important. So he says he wants them to fly approximately 115 miles an hour, like 100 knots. And this is right above the speed where the engines will stall.
Yeah.
And it also means that the pilots have to fly it manually. So that allows for things to happen on the plane that wouldn't usually happen. Namely, how he ends up escaping. But they still scramble a couple planes, and they're following him. But that 115 miles per hour is kind of a problem for fighter jets. And they can't travel that slow. And it's also a problem for a helicopter or anything small range because they can't go that fast. So this is very clever on his part. All this setup is really clever because he's setting up his escape plan.
Because he's robbing a fucking
plane.
You better have a fucking plan, buddy.
But that's a pretty good one.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. So they get back in the plane. They take off. Like I said, there's fighters flying them. There's another guy that's completely unrelated, was doing something else. He's in a plane. He tries to track him, but he starts running out of gas. He has to leave. He closes the cockpit door and leaves them in the cockpit. So it's just him in the cabin. He's the only one in the cabin. And before this, he had kind of threw out some landmarks to the flight attendant, he had mentioned that there was an Air Force base, and that he mentioned something about Tacoma and how it looked at night. And this comes into play a little bit later when they start putting together like an FBI composite of who this guy is. But they get a warning light saying that their aft stairs are down. And this is one of those planes that has like a staircase in the back of the plane.
Yeah, and you're not going to just open it without some stuff going on all crazy up in the cockpit.
Right, but this also, like, if you're going, 350 or to 500 miles an hour, you can't open that thing.
Right.
The pressure's too much, the speed's too much. There would be too much pressure, and if you're at that altitude, you're more than likely going to freeze to death. So he has them fly below 10,000, which is right around. It's high skydiving, but it's still you can skydive from that altitude. So they do feel like some sort of movement in the plane so they can kind of pinpoint where they're at when they felt this.
Yeah.
But later, the pilot admits that his version of where they were to the FBI's version of where they were, they're off a little bit. And over the Northwest, that's a huge deal. It's like Bigfoot country. There's nothing out there.
There's nothing that landmark it.
Right. And, it increases their search a ridiculous amount just because, they're off by a few degrees in directional heading, which is another, 1,000 square miles of search area. They end up landing at Reno Airport.
Yeah.
The biggest little city in the world, which I've never been to. You ever been to Reno?
No. Never been farther than Colorado going west.
I'd really like to go to Reno. I hope it's like Reno 911, which is one of my favorite shows.
Yeah.
And when they land, the stairs are still deployed.
Right. And it's like a fold down hatch set of stairs that come directly out of the back of the plane.
Right.
It's real narrow back there. It's like the only thing. It's just wide enough for those stairs to drop down.
It kind of makes you. Is it like an emergency exit type of thing? Is that?
Yeah, because they didn't deplane that way. That those stairs weren't open. There's a hatch door on the side, and they had a truck with steps that they pulled up to the side of it. Normally, it would disembark, on a plank, but when he traded out the money and parachutes, they pulled like a truck up that has like stairs that are built into the bed of it.
Right.
And they pulled it up to it, and they came out the side up by the front. So the stairs were only opened by him in flight. And it's one of those things that it's like, unless you knew, you wouldn't know they were there. Unless you knew about the plane.
These 727, do they fly these anymore?
I think so. I believe they're still in use.
See, I wish I knew my planes better. I know. Well, I know. I know the big
nobody
ones.
Ever.
Well, I know my RJs and my little ones. But one thing that's funny, you should look it up on Wikipedia because
no, the last 727 was March of 2003.
I was going to say, I've never come across that one. If you look it up on Wikipedia and you get it through, they have a picture of the plane and the stairs go down and a little guy jumps out the back of the stairs, which is kind of funny.
That's funny.
So, all right away, the FBI goes on the plane. They start their investigation. There's cigarettes, which end up getting lost. I mean, come on, man. He smokes like 6 cigarettes, has a couple bourbon and sodas. I mean, come on.
It's like every old-timey show with a cop in it, and they're all inept. They're just like, probably the wife did it. You know,
John Mulaney said if you wanted to commit murder in the 20s, all you had to do is not be there.
right?
Like, hey, there's a pool of there's a pool of blood right over there. He'd be like, ooh, gross, mop it up. But he has a clip-on tie, which I guess that's pretty baller.
Yeah.
I don't know where you would buy an adult clip-on tie.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's a different time.
Yeah.
2 of the 4 parachutes are gone. He took one out for the, I guess, one for the money, right? So this says this is just a website. Calculate me. How much does $200,000 weigh? And they break it out into hundreds, 20s, 10s. So $200,000 weighs about 20. This says 22 and a half pounds. Let's just say 25 pounds.
So that's yeah. So his other parachutes, the money, maybe.
Right. So 2 of the parachutes are gone. They land. Of course, the FBI storms the plane. Nothing's on the plane. His clip-on tie. He has his tie clip. The cigarette butts, which, come on, they lost those. And then I guess his glass, which I never heard about the glass. Did they ever?
No.
They never checked the glass, right?
Not that I'm aware of. I didn't see it anywhere.
Right.
I was wondering the same thing because he ordered a drink. Wouldn't his fingerprints be on it? But they lost those cigarette butts. So.
Right. But they had eyes on him. They kept having to loop back around because they were going too fast. These other fighter planes, and nobody really saw him jump. So they kind of had to scramble to put together a flight path and figure out where exactly he left and where he jumped from. So immediately they're trying to figure out who this guy is. They find out he uses the pseudonym Dan Cooper. And the FBI puts out a list of all the serial numbers for the bills, which is smart.
Yeah.
Because they're looking for like racetracks. They're looking for places that have lots of cash transactions, casinos, things like that.
Right.
The pilots and the FBI get together. They realize they're kind of way out of whack on where exactly they thought they were and the flight path and where he could have went out. And they realize it's a much bigger area to search. The pilot seems to think it's in this place called, I guess it's Washougal. Is that right?
Nailed it.
Is that how they say it?
I don't have no idea.
Which that part of the country was sort of obliterated by Mount St. Helens in the 80s.
Yeah. A lot of people don't remember that.
Right. So they have his mother of pearl tie clip. He smoked Raleigh cigarettes, which I've never had a Raleigh cigarette.
No, I don't think I have.
Seems like something you would find at a bowling alley
with that pearl top tie clip
with a bourbon and soda.
Right. Everything. Right. It's the most stereotypical thing I've ever seen.
In 1978, a placard for instructions on how to lower stairs of a 727 was found by a deer hunter in Castle Rock, Washington.
Yeah.
But that was really north of the flight path. So they thought. But again, they're kind of off on this. In 1980, an 8-year-old kid finds a bunch of 20s
Yeah.
while he's vacationing with his mom and dad.
Yep.
He can't even keep them because they're like beat to hell.
They're all burned up.
Yep.
They're like it looked like the edges were burnt, but I guess they were saying they were deteriorated and shit.
Yeah, they look the pictures of them. They have holes. I mean, it looks like, well, I guess at that time it's what, 12-year-old money.
Yeah, it's pretty old, just sitting out there, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But the theories with where that is, a lot of people think it could have been deliberately buried there. It could have been carried there. It could have flooded and gone there and sat in the mud and then resurfaced later. There's a lot of theories on how the Bills got there.
Yeah.
And I guess, are they all 20s?
That what the kids found?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like $5,800 total.
Okay.
Yeah,
but
it was all 20s. Yeah.
But the serial numbers do match what
they match the money that they gave him for the ransom.
So they do have some DNA from him later that they do hang on. They lose the cigarettes, but they do have the tie clip. And they have the plane ticket, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have sketches of what people think he looks like. They do a ton of analysis on the physical evidence they have. And they come up with some weird stuff.
Yeah.
Like, there's all these weird metals found on his tie clip. Or on his tie itself. Metals that, like, would be involved with somebody that's, like, a machinist. Or, like, somebody that works with some kind of, like, fabrication of metals, some kind.
Right. And dresses fancy when he does it.
Right. But they find, like, titanium.
Yeah, it's real weird.
Cerium, strontium sulfide.
Okay.
Right. And this lends back to a bunch of theories, because these end up connecting certain people that end up having deathbed confessions.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I live a full enough life to have a deathbed confession. I love that part of the movie. Like, my brother hates that part of the movie.
Right.
Where they die and they come back and tell you something.
Come closer.
Yeah, right. Right. They're totally dead.
Yeah.
And then they come back and they're like, wait. And then they give you some, and then they die again.
Yeah.
I want that. I would like to do that.
You just have to have a secret.
Right. I don't have it yet. Someday.
Somebody.
Right. Hijack a plane and jump out the back.
Yeah.
We're about this age.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. I'm ready to hijack a plane.
That would give me a heart attack right now.
Yeah, and it's funny. I just popped up on a picture of the Flo Schaffner.
Yeah. Then or now?
From then.
Okay. And?
Yeah. Cute girl.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Well, it explains why she just chucked it in her purse. Like, yeah, get in line, buddy.
Whatever.
But they say he's about, I don't know, 6 foot, 180, between 5'10" and 6 foot. But decent, like, not short, not tall, not skinny, not fat, just kind of an average white guy.
Yeah.
That apparently looks like everybody we're about to mention in the next segment. But one thing that is really cool to mention right off the bat is that there's a comic book called Dan Cooper.
Yeah.
And it's about a guy that jumps out of planes, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that like, I'm not a huge comic book guy.
Right.
I've only had a handful ever in my life. But kind of cool if you are going to do this, that you decide to do it after a comic book character and be your own superhero.
You're right.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of it for the setup. I mean, we can go through what the FBI thought. At first, they thought he was a paratrooper or like had military training, but then they kind of went against that. And in their original thing, they said at first they thought he was like maybe a thrill seeker or somebody that had been in the military before.
Right.
Because he asked for a certain kind of parachute.
Yes.
But then later, there were things that he did, and I guess that they never fully released the facts of, that suggested he wasn't ever in the military.
Yeah, like.
But I never found a specific example of what they were talking about. And I know when they do investigations like this, they hold a few things back.
Yeah.
So that they know who is telling the truth and who's not.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they do that thing where they're like, they try and play on your ego. So if they think that you're a bit, fool yourself, then they'll play you down. So I see like the FBI at one point, they said they don't think Cooper was an expert. That it was like he got lucky type thing.
They actually said he lacked critical skydiving skill.
So if you're trying to get somebody riled up to leak it to somebody and go, bullshit, man, I can fucking do that. I did. Fuck them. They're just pissed they can't catch me.
And on the west coast, it gets dark early. Mm-hmm. Like the coast. I don't know why and I'm sure there's a reason, but in the Midwest, it seems like it gets dark a little bit later. But like I remember in California when I lived there, and kind of here it's a little bit later, but in California, man, it's 7:00. Between 7 and 8, it goes from like light outside to it's nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
So by 9:00, it's pitch black. And if you're not anywhere near a city, the West is vast. There's tons of area, and it's dark. And it was that night. It was raining. He's going 115 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Multiply plus the speed of falling out of the plane.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just something you do.
If he was to that point, you have to figure that he knew that that moment was going to be nutty. Well, it was going to be crazy. It was going to be, this is for all the marbles. If I can get past this point, I should be okay. But,
you plan for everything to go wrong, right?
Right. So maybe that was what the second parachute was for. Maybe he just strapped it on himself and he pulled out his main chute, and if it didn't work or something, then he could throw on the other one.
And they said that they had seen him tying something to himself.
Yeah.
Which could have been, the money. Maybe he just tied the money to himself.
Did you ever see what the money looked like?
No.
I never could find. I never.
Like the actual packaging,
right? Like how they gave it to him.
No, and why?
I don't know if they photographed it beforehand or not, but I couldn't find anything to show
Why did that kid find only that much money?
Right. So that's why I was wondering if it was in packs that what I mean, that he had to, maybe he stuffed in the other parachute or something, or maybe one of them fell out.
But they never found him.
No.
So there's people that hunt all the time looking for
somebody
Bigfoot.
that claimed that they found a parachute. The DB,
really?
Yeah, the DB Cooper parachute, but
I never did hear that.
Yeah.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
I know. I heard the placard was found, and then the money was found, but I never did. Did they ever connect that to him?
No, I don't think so. I think it was uncorroborated.
So at this point, they have a guy that he hijacked a plane, got money from the FBI, and he jumped.
Yeah.
And nobody's found him to this day. And for all intents and purposes, he made it. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So, who is even capable of pulling something off like this? Well, apparently,
a few people.
Apparently, 800 people.
There are some qualified people to do this. I mean,
they process. Now, see, I just saw this. They processed thousands, but they narrowed it down to 800 people.
Yeah.
And then there's like this hit list of like an all-star team of people.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go through them.
All right.
So right off the bat, first of all, you got to look like DB Cooper.
Yes.
Right. So they profile him as maybe he was in the military, but then they kind of pull that back and say he really didn't know what he was doing. And we just said that was probably because they're trying to either play with him, and they do that. There's two investigation techniques. It's the one is you're a smart guy, right? There's that technique where you're really a dummy, and they tell you you're smart and get you to talk,
right?
Or the other one where they're like, you're a dummy. We know that we have you,
right?
And then that plays into your ego and you telling yourself. Neither of these work, by the way.
Right.
Because this is still up in the air. But the first guy, is not a guy.
Yeah.
It's a girl named Lynn Doyle Cooper.
Yeah.
LD Cooper.
Yeah. You're just kind of, I think you're grabbing at straws.
But
you're like, it's close. Let's get her.
So Lynn Doyle Cooper, you know about her.
They were saying that the family had, on Thanksgiving morning, Lynn Doyle Cooper, known to the family as LD, had returned to the home bloody and bruised and claimed to be involved in a car accident.
Hell of a night, you guys. Hell of a night. I went through it last night. No?
See, so like the Lynn Doyle Cooper story comes from Marla Cooper, who's telling her stories like later on in life about early on, that she had memories on Thanksgiving.
Right, and they're talking. She was talking with her uncle.
Yes,
and they had like a plan. Okay, now I remember this.
Yeah, and it was they were acting. Her uncle and her aunt were acting suspicious before Thanksgiving, and they were using they were using walkie-talkies and left to go supposedly turkey hunting. She said on Thanksgiving morning, they said that she came back, LD came back bruised and bloody from claiming it was a car accident. But Marla Cooper, who lived in Spokane at the time, said she overheard LD Cooper say, "We did it. Our money problems are over. We hijacked an airplane."
And this is important because a lot of people, the reason they suspect their family members is because there's money problems or they're stressed about money, and then all of a sudden, right after this, no problems.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the FBI kind of buries this one because there's not a whole lot about her that shows up. And I wonder if that's like pride or...
well, Lynn died in like 1999, and I think the FBI was like opening this promising lead, and it was like 2011 when they were looking.
And they're doing DNA and shit, and they're like, there's nothing that matches to her.
Yeah, because they had stuff in the house they could provide.
But literally, they made no comment about it.
Right.
So they never really came out and said anything to her. It's just that there's people, and it's important to say there's a ton of books written that have a ton of theories. There's a ton of YouTube videos. There's a ton of podcasts. Everybody has their theory about who it is.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not the only woman.
Yeah.
There's another woman, Barbara Dayton. She's a recreational pilot and librarian, right? Get out of here. She's a librarian. She worked with explosives in construction. She was a merchant marine, and she was in the Army in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to be an airline pilot, but could not get her commercial license. She said she dressed as a man.
Yeah.
So were you like not allowed to be a pilot if you were a girl in the?
What I understand it is that that she was born a man and underwent gender reassignment surgery in 1969.
Jesus, dude.
And lived after that as Barbara rather than her given name Bobby.
I'm going to tell you this. Okay.
So she would have been a woman at the time of the heist. The surgery would have already happened. She would have, you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, I do.
You have to play a man again, which I guess it wouldn't be too hard, but I don't know. You know.
She was born Robert Dayton.
Yeah.
Okay, well. But the FBI really never connects anything to her. Kenneth Peter Christensen.
Yeah. For me, he's one of the ones that was like, okay, he kind of looks like him, but not really. I don't know.
He doesn't, but he's a trained paratrooper.
Yeah, he fits the bill.
He fits the bill. He was in the Army. He joined Northwest Orient as a mechanic. Becomes a flight attendant, and he's based in Seattle. Mm-hmm. He was 45 years old. And kind of the reason they wrote him out, even though he smoked and drank bourbon, was that he was a little shorter. He was about 5'8". And they never could really pinpoint him. He told, of course, here's another deathbed confession.
Yeah. I don't think he got it really out, though, did he? I thought he just said there's something you should know, but I can't tell you.
Right. to his brother,
Yep.
right? And then his family members started really like going into him. So they're like, he's DB Cooper. Like, he was a flight attendant. He has like over $200,000. He has all these news clippings.
Mm-hmm.
He was pissed because they kept striking. He
Yeah.
kept having to take on odd jobs. And his brother was like, he was like a ditch digger. Like, he would dig ditches. And he was pissed that this was going on. And that was kind of like the motivation. And then they find out a little bit later that, well, he sold like a bunch of land.
Mm-hmm.
Like 24 acres of land at 17 grand per acre in the 90s.
Yeah.
And that kind of was accounted for his money. Now, they didn't say how he bought the land.
Yeah.
And I know real estate, you could bury a ton of money in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And very easily, too. You know, especially if you buy farmland.
Right.
You buy farmland, you could make a several $1 million transaction and nobody will ever even blink an eye.
Yeah.
Because you're not developing on it, you know.
Yeah. You're just buying a big chunk of dirt.
You sit on it, you pay taxes on it for like 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you rent it to some farmer who his rent is your taxes. So
Right.
you basically break even for 20 years. And then all of a sudden you make $27 million.
Right.
So they never really said how he bought the land.
Yeah.
But the result is this money.
Yeah, he's got money, and they I think, you know, there's like some romanticizing by some of the family members where, you know, they want now that everybody's dead and nobody can be held accountable, they want to be able to be like, this is my family, they did this, we're important. So, and I get that, like, you know, so when you're a hammer, all you see is nails.
I've never heard that, but I like that a lot. That's going to be our next t-shirt. Okay, that brings us to Jack Kofelt.
Yeah.
Koffelt?
Yeah.
Koffelt? Con man, ex-convict.
Yep.
He was a government informant.
As con men are.
I mean, right? He makes outrageous claims. Like Dr. Evil, he invented the question mark.
Right.
But he said that he was a chauffeur for Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith. It must have been his son, Robert Todd Lincoln's grandson. Right? So it must have been Robert Todd Lincoln, who was Lincoln's son.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been his grandson.
Okay.
Which makes sense. That's like in the 1900s. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not that far away. I mean, trying to think. Yeah. Yeah. It would have been like grandson. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
I just acted like I did math in my head, and then I agreed with you.
Well, yeah. I mean, 65, he dies, and his son's relatively young. I mean, I don't know how old exactly, but teenager, right?
Right.
I know it's the 1800s and people don't live as long, but they live pretty long.
Right.
And you get to like, he was born in 1917. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that fits.
Well, here's the thing. John Tyler, the president.
Oh, I know about this. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I know this. Go ahead. Go ahead.
His grandson just died like a few years ago. Like, what was it? 2012 or something.
How about that guy killing it, right?
Like,
So
what the hell?
Well, he married. Go ahead.
Yeah, he married. Well, he was married and then he remarried, right? He remarried
in his 70s or something.
Yeah, and he was like 70 or 80 years old.
And she was what, like?
She was real young. Yeah, she was
20s,
like in 20s. Yeah, and then his son did the same fucking thing.
And then she just died. I just read something too about the last Civil War widow. Was something similar to that.
Yeah. It's crazy though. I mean,
right. She had married a guy really young that was in the Civil War.
So this isn't even like Abe Lincoln. John Tyler was born in 1790.
Right.
And his grandson not great-grandson, grandson just recently passed away. So there's there's weird possibilities for
my buddy, he's rich, and he went to a really affluent school, and he went to school with Warren Harding's grandson. And when they would talk about the Teapot Dome scandal, they would pull him out of class because it was embarrassing to his family.
Jesus.
Which I thought was hysterical.
Give him a safe space.
Yeah, and that was in the 90s.
Right.
But he went to a school, he had a headmaster, not a principal. That's a difference. Those are different. That's a different economy there.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, this guy, John Koffel, he is a con man. He tells his cellmate to sell his story to a production company. And he is sort of discounted by the FBI because he doesn't know like the extreme details, but he still goes on CBS and 60 Minutes to try to get an interview.
Yeah, they turned him down.
They turned him down. And Lincoln's descendants turned him down too, don't they? Yeah. Like, you were never a chauffeur.
That's easy though. It's a con, man. Everybody's like, fuck off, man.
Right.
You still owe me for this,
Right. So William Gossett, he's with the Marine Corps. He was in Korea and Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
He had jump training, wilderness survival.
Yeah, he was a survivalist.
Right. He was a ROTC instructor. He was at Weber State. He had a talk show in Salt Lake City discussing the paranormal. I wish he was still alive. We'd have him on the show.
Yeah.
He was obsessed with this. He had a ridiculous collection. Mm-hmm. He once he showed his son.
Yeah, well, he told his son that he did it. Yeah.
Right. And said his dad was strapped for cash, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he was a gambler. But the FBI has nothing against him.
Yeah. And then they submitted DNA and fingerprint too, I think.
And he is never looked at seriously as somebody that is a serious contender to be D.B. Cooper. There's Richard Lepsey. He was still alive.
Yeah.
He was a grocery store manager, married, father of 4, living in Grayling, Michigan, and he disappeared in 1969.
Yeah.
His vehicle was found at an airport, and he was boarding a flight for Mexico. After the hijacking, they noted that he kind of, like his family said, he sort of looked like the composite drawings of D.B. Cooper. So he never really shows back up. He doesn't have any kind of deathbed confessions. He never talks to his family again, as far as I know, right?
No, that's they just, and that was the only thing they had was that he looked like him, and there were some weird circumstances.
Like he was going to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And the FBI never really says anything else about him. Now there's John List.
They keep, it's funny to me when you hear all these people and you're looking at them, and they're like, I mean, some of them are like, I did it. You know what I mean? And the FBI keeps just like summarily turning them down, and you start thinking like, did they just lose the cigarettes? Was it just the cigarettes they lost?
Yeah.
Or are they just sitting back like, just tell every one of them we got no link. Just let it be a mystery.
I have a theory. Well, we'll get to it at the end.
Yeah, you want to get through some of these other.
John List was an accountant. He was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War. He murdered his wife. Fun fact.
Yeah, and his kids.
And his mom.
Yep. After shooting his wife, his mom, and his 3 kids.
Well, I mean, come on. He had a bad day. And
Bad day.
Like, what's for dinner? And she's like, you're a bullshit son. You just drink all day. He's like, you know what? I'll be right back.
I'll be right back.
And then, so right before the Cooper hijacking, he withdrew a bunch of money from his mom's bank account.
Yeah.
And then disappeared.
Yeah.
A lot of people match him to the description. But he never says that he's involved. He's just kind of
he denied it.
Right.
Which you think at that point, because he was like, yeah, I killed all them. I killed my whole family. But I didn't hijack that plane. So you think he did it.
There's tons of people that think he did it.
Yeah.
But the FBI doesn't think he did it. And
he doesn't think he did it.
And he eventually goes to prison for it. And he dies in prison in 2008. Ted Mayfield. He was Special Forces, a veteran pilot, competitive skydiver.
Mm-hmm. His goddamn list is like every one of these guys. Like he was really good at going up and down stairs. I mean, like it's like every one of them's got like all the cues you need.
Like killing people because Ted killed somebody.
Yeah, again. Does it involve killing people? Because
Ted got negligent homicide. So this is why I don't think it's Ted. I'm just gonna throw this out there.
Right.
Ted got negligent homicide because he was teaching people to skydive, and their parachutes didn't open.
That's not a good teacher.
He's the worst.
Worst teacher ever.
Terrible Yelp review, 1 star.
1 star.
No, but he ends up getting, like, he's found indirectly responsible for another 13 additional deaths.
Yeah.
He has a criminal record, armed robbery, transportation of a stolen aircraft, which, unbelievably, he pilots a plane after losing his pilot's license, which is nuts.
Yeah.
Like, you're like a cowboy at that point. Like, you should be in a Bon Jovi video because, like, to just dick off and fly a plane that you're not certified for.
Right.
There's so much shit that can go wrong that you need help.
Right.
And you're like, fuck it, I can do it.
I'm just going to try.
Because you're on those, it's not quite like practicing medicine, but like, there's all kinds of things that go on with planes. They're still studied. Like, I don't know if you know, right after 9/11, there was a plane that went down in New Jersey.
I didn't
Right.
hear about it.
Well, it was like right after 9/11. I don't know exactly when it was. I'll probably piece it back in after this. Now that I know how to do GarageBand. But like everybody thought it was like a terrorist. But here what had happened was the guy had taken off, and they had this wind, and he had a certain setting for the takeoff.
Mm-hmm.
And when he went up, it had never occurred that equation for wind, altitude, speed, right?
Yeah.
And it caused them to crash. So it's something like, it's an ongoing process when you have these giant machines that have, this crazy capability, and you're being pulled through the air. You're reliant on these other forces, and it's just not always studied. But it's crazy that you would do that without the knowledge or the certification, because it's essentially like a death sentence.
It could be, yeah.
But he did it.
I tell you, I was like, I always see these like post-apocalyptic movies and stuff, and zombie movies, and there it's like they always find like a helicopter. I'm like, I would just say fucking get in it and drive it. And then like one day I was on YouTube, and it was like how to fly a helicopter. I was like, oh cool, I'll click on this, bone up on this just in case the apocalypse happens.
Right.
And I get on there, and it was so complicated. He's like, if you don't make sure that this is like this, the whole thing will just start spinning in circles and break itself apart. I was like,
yeah.
He was like, he went through this whole thing where it's like, if you don't do this exactly right, and this doesn't prime up exactly how it should, the whole thing's gonna go crazy. And it was like crazy, the stuff they were saying. And I was like, okay, so I'm not just gonna jump in a helicopter and take off.
There's a whole checklist that you have to do before you even fly a Cessna,
right?
Let alone like one of these planes,
right? You could think you're like turning on the prop and be like, okay, we got it, it's firing up, it's starting to go around, but you didn't put on the tail, and it just starts spinning you in circles and rips you to pieces.
Right. If your trim's down, or your flaps are down, or like the pitot tube senses pressure, and it'll mess up your engines. Like there's all this stuff that like messes up your altitude, your heading, like right. Like to just do that blindly is insane. But he is like a legit contender. This guy, at first he's totally ruled out, and then these two amateur researchers kind of put a bunch of circumstantial evidence together, and he's asked like, where were you, and blah blah, but he says that they called him, the FBI called him several times that day, and he called them 2 hours after it happened.
Right.
And the FBI says they never called him, and he says, and they say that there's no way he could have called them and jumped out of the plane and done all this.
Right.
So he's kind of ruled out.